Okay. So good morning, everybody. It's really a great honor for me to be able to introduce this session on regenerative agriculture. My name is Carlo Fadda. I work for the CGIAR, a global research institution, and the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT, one of the centers of the CGIAR. I lead a research area on biodiversity for food and agriculture, and I'm also lead one of the global initiatives called Nature Positive Agriculture. And it's really my passion to talk about the regenerative side. And there is a reason for that. The reason is that we are here at the climate COP, and agriculture, ironically, is one not only of the major contributor of greenhouse gas emission, but it's also one of the major victims of greenhouse gas emission. In fact, agriculture is responsible for about 1/3 of the total greenhouse gas emission, and that of course affects production, productivity, it affects food security, nutrition security. As climate change, new pests and diseases emerge, abiotic stress, abiotic conditions become more difficult for people to produce enough food for a growing population. So agriculture is not only responsible for the greenhouse gas emission, but it's also responsible for other environmental damages. Agriculture is responsible for about 80% of the total deforestation and 86% of total species extinction and risk. And that's because partly through deforestation, but also because of the pollution that it generates in the environment to, for example, nutrient leaching that creates dead zone, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico and in many other parts of the world. It is responsible for land degradation. About 40% of the land is degraded, and this is another way through which agriculture, the capacity of system to produce food, become limited. And it's also responsible for emerging nutritional challenge. And so it's not only significantly affecting the planetary health, but it's also affecting the people health. Our diets are very much simplified. We rely on 3 crops for 50% of our calories, and we have 5,000 crops that could actually be used for nutrition, for 5,000 species. And we are not using them, and these 5,000 species have amazing nutritional and nutrient composition, and so they can contribute really to address some of those crises. We have the obesity one, which is over-reliance on certain crop, but then we have malnutrition, which is also about eating a diet which is too simplified, doesn't allow for enough micronutrients to actually be taken, particularly by children and women. So it's another very discriminatory factor. And we cannot think that we need to address one or the other, that one is a priority over the other. We need to address them simultaneously. And we need to address them simultaneously because they are all interconnected. So if we can improve if we can have more biodiversity into our production system, we will have better nutrition and maybe better resilience and mitigation of climate change. So we can decide what is our entry point, but at the end of the day, we need to have an holistic approach to actually lead to more sustainable agriculture. And I really believe that regenerative agriculture is one of these approaches that can really help transforming our food system to address this issue really together. And that is urgent. We know we have no time to waste. We know that the tipping points of climate change are reached very fast. And so we need to take urgent action, not urgent talking. I think there has been a little bit too much of talk, and not enough walk, and it's time to start walking. And this COP, at least for something, is making us walking a lot because it's so dispersed, and so at least on that front we are. It's a good contributor. But also this COP is sending mixed messages. On the one hand, I think there are very significant progress in the negotiation and in the language that the COP is using. For example, the declaration on the first day on sustainable agriculture, which includes all the right thing starting from the farmers, indigenous knowledge, the biodiversity, and basically it is an agenda for regenerative agriculture that captures the holistic dimension of it. But then the global stock taking is kind of very conservative when it comes to food, and the action on food, the stop of what was before known as Coronivia and then Sharm el-Sheikh, it's also very conservative, if you want. So indeed there is, I think, a big progress and big push from this COP in terms of embedding better the food system agenda into the climate agenda, but I think there is still quite a lot of work to be done. I also think that there are, so when we look at regenerative agriculture, and given that it's an holistic dimension, it's a very broad agenda. If we want to consider planetary aspects, soil health, water, biodiversity, agrobiodiversity, we need to be measured. We need to be able to have a framework that is measurable, because we need to understand whether when we start walking the talk, whether we can whether we are leading where we want to be. And if you add the socio-economic dimension, the livelihood, the economic side of it, it's another very complex element, because the regenerative is really from the farm to the fork and everything that is in between, how it affects the livelihood of farmers and communities in rural areas, and how it affects the well-being of the consumers in cities. And all of these, once again, needs to be measured. Is the diets of people in urban areas improving, the diets of the poor, the diets of the people who don't have access or cannot afford those sustainable diets? Are we taking all of these into consideration? And so we need to have a kind of framework, which I think hopefully this panel also will help to define. But we need to have a framework through which we need to measure progress on how we are actually going towards regenerative agriculture. And in a nutshell, this needs to have both planetary indicators as well as people indicators, well-being indicators. This session is about the challenges in the implementation, and I think there are many. One that I mentioned is the little bit conservative approach that at times is taken by the various COP. Maybe if you want to be optimistic, even the COP, the CBD COP that took place last year in Montreal, and the fact that in the global biodiversity framework there are so many indicators that lead towards regenerative agriculture is a good sign, is a good sign of convergence between different bodies towards one approach. But still there are many, and I think one is the fact that there is no agreement on what to do, and we need to have an outcome-based approach. I mean, I think there are two elements. One, and that's something that I would like to avoid in some of the conversation, is which framework are we going to have? Some people want to have an agroecological approach. Some people talk about regenerative, and then you have the climate-smart, nature-based solutions, and you have many of those. At the end, they all aim at the same thing. We did a study together with the UN Environmental Program, and we found out that when it comes to practices and the action on the ground, more or less 75% of the practices are shared by people advocating for one method and the other. And if we take seriously the need to urgently take action, then I think we need to focus on the outcomes. We need to focus on where we want to be. We need to focus on setting this framework for us to be able to be where we want to be in 10 years' time, and to really have food system transform to be a very significant part of the solution to the climate crisis. And the other is having, it's obviously a multi-stakeholder undertaking. It cannot be done by science alone. It cannot be done by policymakers alone. It cannot be done by the environmental groups, cannot be done by the private sector. So one of the challenges probably to sit together and really to understand, and that is what this panel really is taking up, and really try to find that common framework through which we can work, because every group of stakeholders is needed for for transition towards regenerative agriculture. So this panel will help shed light on some of the challenges that have been highlighting, and I'm really looking forward to have such a distinguished panel group to put their perspective from their own stakeholder group on how we can really achieve regenerative agriculture concretely on the ground through action. Let me introduce them, the distinguished speakers. First is Elena Pita. She is at the Biodiversity Foundation, the director at Biodiversity Foundation at the Spanish Ministry for Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge. I'm not going to introduce or to give them the background. I will ask them to do themselves because I think that they know better who they are. And the second is Daniel Zimmer. He is the Director of Sustainable Land Use at Climate, KIC. We then have Sarah Scher. She's President and CEO of Eco-Agriculture Partners, as well as Chair of 1000 Landscape for 1 billion people. Fabrice Salamanca, he's Vice President of Global Public Affairs at Danone. Tara Sham, Director at Region 10. And Maria Dolores Valderrain, Regenerative Mulching Winners, Generación Clima, representing the youth, which is, of course, very important because we really do all of this for the future generation. And I really believe that we owe our children and the youth a world that is habitable and it's sustainable. So thank you for joining this panel, and I would like to ask now our speaker to introduce themselves in 3 minutes, starting from Elena.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The Biodiversity Foundation is attached to the Ministry of Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge, as you said, and it's an entity with 25 years of history. Our mission and our main goal, as the name explicitly says, is conservation and restoration of ecosystems, and that's what we have done for 25 years. But very soon in this history, we realized that it's not only conservation and preservation, but halting the main biodiversity loss drivers that will help us to achieve our results on this side. So very soon in history, projects regarding conservation and restoration integrated the other economic sectors. For instance, we have been working in marine protected areas, for instance, and we have always worked with the fisheries sector, or we have been working in the area of developing green jobs and green economy or blue economy since the beginning. But it is after the pandemic that we have the opportunity of designing new lines of work, and also to having important funding coming from the next generation funds. So with an aim to transform the economy, to do things differently. And in this framework, we decided, on the one hand, to work on urban territories. This is where we collaborate with Klimatkik. So fostering the role of nature in urban territories, but also working in rural zones and working in the area of bioeconomy. This is how we started working and thinking about this issue of regenerative agriculture practices, bioeconomy, and also we developed a specific line of work for that, with a funding of 20 million euros for a first call for proposals and 77 million euros for a second call for proposals. And now we have additional money because we have had a lot of demand for this type of projects. But also we link to that kind of projects which focus on restoration, conservation, and the development of economic opportunities in rural areas. We are working also in the area of capacity building, because we realize that there is a demand of training and capacity building linked to these new understanding of agriculture and all other related economic activities that is not fulfilled at the moment. And it is specifically linked to this aspect of holistic understanding of what is the economic chain of value of producing food, since the first steps of the agriculture production, including commercialization and the final until the final consumer. So. This is how, with conservation of nature as an entry point, we ended up working on agriculture and capacity building aspects.
Thank you so much. Very important, particularly indeed the capacity building. It's not easy to appreciate the complexity and the multidimensionality of regenerative agriculture. Daniel, do you want to introduce yourself?
Are you wanting personal introductions or our spiel?
Sorry?
Are you wanting our spiel or just our introduction about ourselves?
Bit of both, Sarah. Bit of
Because
both
we
in
had
3
a number
minutes.
Okay, that's what I thought. This is our.
No, I will ask the question later. Now it's just
okay.
introducing who you are, your organization, and then I will ask the question.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Do you hear me well? Yes. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be here during this important day of the COP dealing with food and food security. So I'm working at Climate Kick. Sounds a bit strange, KIC. Anyway, it's a European organization. We were designed to generate innovation in relation to transforming and addressing particularly climate change issues. So we have particularly focused our action in the recent years on systemic transformation and understanding how working with complex adaptive systems can be achieved. And we are, to be modest, very much learning how to do this, because we feel that we have to learn constantly dealing with these complex systems. So I'm working particularly on land use activities. And to show you the way we do this, we have, of course, a number of sectoral approaches. So working on agriculture, food, for instance, and but also working very much on forests, on peatlands, trying to address the different critical issues related to land use. But then we want to bring all this together into landscape approaches. So that's where we collaborate particularly with Sarah from Eco-Agriculture Partners in a program called 1000 Landscape for 1 billion people. So, and for us, landscapes are the ultimate place where we want to transform entire systems, looking at the same time at agriculture, forests, even urban settlements, and trying to take this holistic and systemic approach. So that's why also the regenerative approaches are very interesting for us, because regenerative approaches embrace in a way the complexity and the way complex systems are functioning, and this is so we recognize ourselves very much into regenerative approach and in landscape approaches in this area of land use. But as you mentioned, we are working on cities quite a lot also. We work on with startups, with young entrepreneurs. We work on circular economy and transforming the economies as well. So we have quite a broad spectrum of activities. But isn't it normal when you work with complex systems, you never know what is the boundary of the system you need to work with? It's, but this is very important. We need to work also on this topic, because it's so much related, and the more you work with complex systems, the more you understand that you need to integrate new things that you had not anticipated. So that's why it's also an important learning exercise. Thank you.
It's like a snowball. The more you do, the more the bigger becomes the system. True. Thank you, and thank you for mentioning the relevance of working with the urban, the entrepreneurship, the private sector, and the circularity. a system can be regenerative only if it is circular. Otherwise, we only extract.
Exactly.
So, thank you for highlighting that. Sarah?
Hi, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm Sarah Shear. I'm the president of Eco Agriculture Partners and chair of 1000 Landscapes. I was, the first 25 years of my life, I was trained as an agriculture and resource economist, and I worked primarily in the tropics in Latin America and in Africa. And one thing about economics is you're trained to think in terms of trade-offs. A little more of this, a little less of that, and I'm a little older than many of the people here. For a really long time, the framework was if you wanted a little more environment, you needed to have a little less farming. If you wanted a little more farming, you were going to have to be willing to sacrifice the environment. And that was the world that I grew up in. And I worked in places where people were intensely dependent upon ecosystems that were degrading, and they were trying to farm and double and triple their agricultural production on lands that were degrading. And so they were struggling in what they used to call marginal lands. Can we get more farming, and also can we restore our lands? And at one point, I got involved in a couple of global studies where it became evident that if you looked at the data, most of the world's watersheds, most of the world's biodiversity, and more than 50% of the land in protected areas was under agriculture. And we have this huge impact of agriculture on climate change, but also a huge portion of the carbon sinks are in agricultural lands. And I stepped back and said, this trade-off model's got to go. We have to get past the trade-off models. What are the ways in which we're going to increase agriculture production and security and resilience and turn agriculture from a source of degradation to being one of the major drivers of restoring biodiversity, restoring watersheds, cleaning up the climate, et cetera. And at that point in time, around 2000, even the CGIAR, I was a researcher with the CGIAR, which is where Carlo fits, was not asking that question. They were saying, how can we make farming less bad for the environment? So we started this organization called Eco Agriculture Partners. We're an NGO based in the, actually we're globally based, we're small, we're an action research group, and we've been looking at, okay, what have we learned from people out in the world of win-win-win solutions, and how you can make win-win-win solutions actually happen. And I can talk in my other response about how that led to the development with a lot of partners of 1000 Landscapes. But,
Thank you, Sarah. Also in the CGIAR, we are moving from an and/or type of question into and. We want to have healthy, good, safe food for healthy people and a good environment for a healthy planet. So, thank you for emphasizing that. Fabrice Salamanca, please, can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Fabrice Salamanca, Global Public Affairs for Danone. Thanks for the invitation to the Spanish government. Glad to be here. What I wanted to share with you today, it's three subjects. One is our Danone Impact Journey that we launched early this year in January, and it's our integrated sustainability strategy. And it's important because it's really integrated. It's our footprint in all the value chain and considering all the scopes. The second point, it's two big bets that we engage this year also. The regenerative agriculture, but with a different approach, and the methane reduction. And the third point I want to share, it's a best practice, which is the BACA report. The BACA report is the first strategy for the decarbonization of the dairy value chain in Spain. So let me introduce a little bit the context of Danone. We started our journey in 2006 with blurry commitments. No, at that time, no, we commit ourselves to reduce 30% our carbon footprint. No, with no clear idea about the scopes, the how to make it, how to measure it. It was really blurry. And back in 2017. There was a huge evolution regarding climate crisis and climate change topics. We realized that we had to commit to regenerative agriculture as the best way to impact our value chain. And this is because, and we commit at that time, it was the COP23, We were the first company, food company, to commit to have 30% of our agricultural ingredients coming from regenerative agriculture. So why regenerative agriculture? Because of its positive impacts in many aspects, from carbon sequestration, biodiversity, soil conservation, climate change, water efficiency, farmers' resilience, circular practices. So we thought at that time, if we want to lead the change, we need to commit to regenerative agriculture. So I mentioned our Danone Impact Journey, and now this Danone Impact Journey is aligned and is aligning all the company strategy to a science-based target, and also align with the 1.5 degrees climate goal. But we find out that we needed to have bold commitments in where we can lead the change. So we thought our biggest footprint comes from methane and from dairy. It's 70%. So why these commitments in 1/3 of the piece, of our share? We need to go faster, and we need to be ambitious. So we thought we need to lead the change. So we launched our methane pledge, and now we announce in this COP the Dairy Methane Action Alliance to accelerate among the industry this change. And then the BACA report that we launched a month ago in Madrid, Spain, which is this first approach with all the key players in the dairy sector to accelerate the transition for dairy decarbonization of this important economic sector.
Thank you, and we are curious to, that sounds very important and impactful, so we are curious to hear more in the continuation of this panel. Tara, can you tell us what is Regen 10 and what you do for regenerative agriculture? The name seems to be alluding to regenerative.
Happy to share. Thank you. Y muchísimas gracias también por la invitación. Regen 10 is a multi-stakeholder initiative, as you said, to respond to these very complex issues. We can't do this alone. We have 13 implementing partners, including 1,000 Landscapes as partners, as well as the World Farmers Organization and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. That's our immediate group of implementing partners, but we have many more in a high-level advisory capacity as well as a technical capacity, and we're growing. And we're surrounding a common goal. We are looking to align on a common understanding, on a shared understanding of how regenerative and agroecological approaches to food systems transformation can deliver positively for people, for nature, and for climate. But really central to that transformation is the role of farmers and landscape actors. So we're really centering all our efforts around this body of individuals in the regenerative space. I think maybe one of the ways I can explain what we're doing is actually to tell you what a busy weekend we've had as Regen 10. I know we've all had a very, very busy weekend this weekend, but we've been able to share this weekend several outputs from the partnership. One of these, led partly by Sarah, actually written partly by Sarah, is a discussion brief pulling out some of those learnings, the experiences from Landscapes transformation. I knew you'd have it with you. Experiences from Landscapes transformations. What are some of the opportunities and the challenges, as we're here today to discuss, around making that transformation? We've also launched a report, a brief report, a small one, looking at the cost of transition. It's great for us to talk about, oh, let's all move in this direction, but really, what is the cost to a farmer or to a landscape in making that change? And so I urge you to have a look at that report on the Regen 10 website, regen10.org. We've also, on the same website, we have a map, and this is a growing map of these landscape initiatives globally. We have around 140 such landscapes mapped, and we are inviting anyone and everyone to tell us more about the landscapes that you're working on. If they're not on the map, we'd love to have you on the map as a way of sharing and learning globally. That's at the landscapes level. We're also, and we have also been working very hard on an outcomes framework. So you talked about walking the talk, we need to know how we are walking that talk. Are we making any progress? Are we actually moving while we think we're walking? So in response to that, we've been working on a draft outcomes framework, and I can explain maybe in this next portion a little bit more about why it's draft and why we haven't finished it yet. And it is designed to be a holistic, farmer-centric outcomes framework, and we're looking again at outcomes rather than only at practices. And it is intended to be a consultative effort. So to be continued, but I'm happy to share more.
Thank you. Very important and very important to remind that all the food comes from the farms, and particularly the smallholder, 500, 600 million smallholder that produce 30% of our food, and they are normally quite forgotten. So thank you for putting them at the center of your speech. Maria Dolores, can you tell us about yourself, your organization?
Yes. First of all, I'm Mariola, but I'm only a part of a fantastic team that is here with us. We are a university team that we are committed with the climate change and for being more conscious and more specific about agricultural regenerative practices. We have designed a mulching regenerative project that helps not with the methane, in our cases with CO2, that we can capture them under our feet with the uses of rest of producers, as we can think about breast of orange or different cultives. We know that the key point here is the context. We have to attend and study the environmental case because we can't extend all our projects in any land. And apart of that, the other key here in mulching regenerative design is the help and the partner with the institutions. That's why we have to thank the Foundation of Biodiversity and the Minister of Transition and Energetic to be here, because they feel and I think you have a necessity to listen us, to incorporate us here in the power talks, because I think, and that's important in the discourse to change, we are not the future, we are the present. We have something to say, and that's why a part of the identify the demands of agricultures and institutions, we need them, and that's why we have designed a prototype of an ape that creates another biocircular economy system inside the producer.
Thank you. Very interesting, and indeed the youth are so important together with the women. I was looking at the audience and the panel, and it's such a large prevalence of women, and maybe we need also to elaborate. They are so critical for regenerative agriculture. So, and you represent both. So, listen. It's very important, and I agree to listen to you. So now let me ask some follow-up question. I think we had already quite a deep understanding of the composition, the breadth, the diversity of the panel. Elena, you emphasized the need and the importance of capacity building and the work of the Biodiversity Foundation to identify those needs. Can you tell us a little bit more which are the key needs that you've been identified that are really relevant to ensure that regenerative practices can actually walk the talk? And how can targeted education and skill development contribute actually to overcome the challenges in implementing regenerative agriculture?
Yes, thank you. In fact, the Spanish National Plan on Adaptation had an activity that was something like analyzing the opportunities for employment in the framework of the ecological transition. So the Biodiversity Foundation, together with the Spanish Office for Climate Change, conducted a study which was, of course, based on the review of studies and information, but it was mainly based on the discussion with different experts and focus groups. And we tried to identify in which sectors job creation was particularly important in terms of the ecological transition, and also what were the capacity needs that this transformation entailed. Because, well, the sectors, many of us could maybe imagine what sectors could be. Of course, renewable energy is one of them, and of course, regenerative agriculture or sustainable agriculture. But what was interesting in this study was the in-depth analysis of the whole chain of value in each of the sectors. And well, I invite you to have a look to this study in our website, because it's very detailed. We analyzed 14 sectors, and 3 of them are related to regenerative agriculture and fisheries. So, because we include not only agriculture, also forestry, because agroforestry is also interesting and a part of the solution, and also everything that is connected to the sea, to the maritime sector, because as I mentioned before, it is also an important area of work in the foundation. Well, it is clear that the ecological transition will create new jobs. It is true that some others will be destroyed, but the balance will be positive, and there are many studies that show that at the international, European, and national level. But another part of the reality that we have seen in all these experts groups is that today, not in the future, but nowadays, many companies are not finding the profiles they need to fulfill the activity they want to develop in some innovative sectors, including agriculture. This is something that is happening in Europe and in Spain, of course, too. It is also interesting to see how the opportunities for job creation, for instance, in the agriculture sector, are in the whole chain of value. It's not only that there will be more space for ecological or regenerative agriculture, it's also that we will need software development, we will need to think about commercialization, we will need to think about agriculture planning, the technique, all those technical aspects, because as Sarah mentioned, in the world where I am an agronomic engineer, in the world where we studied, we didn't have this holistic approach that I think requires this understanding of the nexus between food, agriculture, climate, and economical development. So a particular focus was given in our study to this aspect, these technical aspects of agricultural planning with a holistic view. And the second aspect was also working with farmers, because farmers have also grown in this past time, where they have an understanding of what is a clean farm with no weeds, or what are the need of how, well, there are many things that need to be done differently. So those 2 aspects were clearly highlighted in our study, among others. And this is why, and a third aspect that I think is interesting, that based on this study, we are developing a funding instrument. So we will do a call for proposals. And what we want to do is to integrate these capacity building companies or entities that can provide this learning or this knowledge with the companies or the people in need. So we are designing this instrument in order to channel some funding to fulfill this objective.
Thank you. It's really exciting to see that you are really embracing the complexity of this approach. Daniel, you mentioned about the innovation aspect of your work. And can you maybe elaborate further on the role, how you see the role of innovation and education in overcoming the challenges and fostering widespread adoption, because at the end it needs to go to scale? And how does Climate KIC contribute to addressing those knowledge gaps and promoting scalable regenerative practices?
Important question. I will try to answer in a couple of minutes. First of all, to say that with regenerative practices, we are introducing an important paradigm shift. We are perhaps not conscious of it, but for centuries, millennia, agriculture has been seen as independent, or at least even constructed against nature. We need to completely reverse this approach, and so if we think about it, it means a lot of really mindset evolution. We have been thinking that weeds, for instance, are not good, but we see that companion crops today are studied and can indeed reinforce existing crops. So just to give an example, so there is a lot that needs to be done in order to reverse a sort of historical trend of agriculture, and we cannot underestimate indeed the need to change the way we think about agriculture. But this is what regenerative approaches are trying to do, and I personally like very much this. I also always say that it's not only regenerative that we need to be, we need to recognize that agriculture will always be extractive, but it needs to be circular and regenerative. So we have a sort of, we mimic nature by indeed extracting something, but ensuring that the system will continue to function. And we always need to have this in the back of our mind when we deal with the transformation of current practices. Then on what I observe on the ground, and I live in a region in France where there are a lot of regenerative approaches that are emerging. It's very interesting to observe that, and I've seen this, by the way, in Europe in general, a lot of the knowledge is coming from bottom up. So we see many farmers doing just amazing things, combining different types of solutions that mobilize organic matter from the cities, create compost, prepare biochar, look at it for their fields, for the cattle. They also transform completely, of course, the way they manage their soils, remove any synthetic fertilizers progressively, etc. And they manage a lot by just talking, exchanging with each other. And so I've seen this, we have been working in the past years on collecting information on such initiatives, and it's just amazing. Tens and maybe I don't know all of them, but many of these initiatives exist in Europe that really make the exchanges between farmers very effective in not talking but walking the transition that is needed. And I think this is also interesting. It's in the way we think about transformation, because it's not so much top down, researchers, people who have a lot of knowledge that bring this knowledge to the ground. No, because we deal with these complex systems, there is so much to learn also by just observing them, that research even has not been used to do this, to have this holistic and systemic analysis of what is happening on the ground. So this is one of my really fundamental learnings in the past years. And just to end on the innovation part, of course all this requires new approaches from the research, but from all stakeholders, in order to reinvent also the way we look at systems, but also be able to nudge these systems and understand how they behave, because we are dealing with very complex animals, And we don't know necessarily if we start inputting new things or new knowledge, how these systems will behave. And so it's also a new learning. And so in Climate Kick, we are convinced that innovation is really needed for this systemic transformation. We all collectively have to learn a lot in order to make this transformation happen. And I'm pleased here to say that we have been now working for 2 years with the Irish government to take a very holistic approach to transform the entire food and agricultural system. And we have been working with hundreds of stakeholders to identify indeed how to change the mindset and reverse the trends of the previous production and consumption patterns. I will not add more on this, but
No.
this is the experience of Climate Kick. Thank you.
Thank you. And you raise a very important point on traditional knowledge and farmers-led innovation, and so how we can bring together different knowledge systems as a solution to address the complexity and the challenges of implementing regenerative agriculture. Sarah, you talk about your multi-stakeholder collaborative and multi-stakeholder partnership as something that needs to be leveraged to address the challenges faced in the widespread implementation of regenerative agriculture. Can you tell us more how you are doing this through the 1,000 Landscape for 1 Billion People initiative?
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. When you look at the challenge in front of us for regenerative agriculture, this is not just something about practices. If you look, farmers need to rejigger their livelihoods and their systems. From the point of view of food chains and consumers, we need to really worry about the food supply. I mean, regenerative agriculture has to be able to supply the food we need. We're also seeing that the regenerative agriculture system has to play this enormous role in restoring the planet with biodiversity and water. And then we have companies who are making commitments on sustainability, and they need to be able to find a way that they can secure sourcing that's going to be regenerative. So what this means is that the challenge for doing regenerative agriculture is far beyond the traditional groups that we think of in food and agriculture. Mm-hmm. It's a whole of society needs to come in place. And I think this is being recognized in a lot of areas, and you're starting to have high-level groups having these dialogues between the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Environment, and between companies and between farmers' organizations. But at the same time, and I think much more powerfully and impactfully, you're having the rise all around the world of new kinds of place-based collaboratives. We've got our place here, it's got this biodiversity challenge, it's got this water challenge, it's these kinds of farmers, it's this kind of consumers for their products. And they're saying, if we're gonna rejigger a regenerative agriculture system, we've all gotta work together and do the systems. We've got to actually change the system and the ways in which we're all interacting with one another. And you're finding the explosion of this. Some of them are called landscape initiatives, some are called jurisdictional, territorial initiatives, bioregional initiatives, but it's these sort of meso-level collaboratives that are coming up. And most of them are quite squarely looking at a holistic set of outcomes, because that's the only way you get all the people in the room to stay there. You've got to care about the farmers, you got to care about the environment, you got to care about the governments, you got to care about the companies, and they're going to have to figure out how to do this. And I think it's more than just having a dialogue platform. What we've seen, and this is one of the things in the Regen 10 collaborative report that we were just putting together, what are the ways in which doing these landscape collaboratives can in fact accelerate the transition to and the transformation to regenerative agriculture. One of them is that when you start looking at a whole jurisdiction or a whole landscape, you can set your level of ambition much higher. Instead of saying, well, I'm going to work with my community here with 500 farmers or 5,000 farmers, what's the 100,000 farmers that we're going to have? The second one is you can deal with stewardship of the whole ecosystem that is underpinning a sustainable agriculture. Thirdly, you can mobilize strategic allies. Farmers are not always the most politically powerful groups. And finally, you can manage the complexity, the risks, and you don't have to do it on your own. You can do it with others. Unfortunately, and I speak to this capacity question, there is very little institutional support for these landscape partnerships. And that led to the beginning of 1,000 Landscapes for 1 billion people, where we have a large collaborative of about 40 organizations now. It's growing. It's a platform for groups to come together to provide targeted support on information technology, on capacity development, for collaborative group action, for mobilizing finance, for the investment portfolios that come out of landscape action plans, and it's supporting coalitions of landscape partnerships and their allies at the national level so that they can work together. There's much more to be said. Go to landscapes.global and learn more, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We have 10 minutes remaining. If would like, hopefully, to have a chance for the public to also raise question, one or two. Fabrice, you talk a lot about Danone and how, in collaboration with other partners in the field of dairy cattle sector, is working towards decarbonizing the sector, and you presented a BACA report publicly. Can you tell us more about what this report is about, and what role does regenerative agriculture play in the sector decarbonization?
Yes, thank you. First of all, the first point is related with what Sarah just pointed out. What is the BACA report? It is a consensus, because we gather all the relevant stakeholders, from scientists, the most renowned experts in the livestock and environmental sustainability fields, universities, farmers, government officials, NGOs, the industry. So it's a consensus built with all the value chain. Second, it's a network driving force, because we want them to commit to actions, not only talking, so actions in their field of activity. Third point, it's the, as I mentioned, the first decarbonization strategy. And why we know this is a strategy? Because there are concrete and specific recommendations on standardized measurements, how to have an integral perspective, how to deal with sustainable feeding, how to promote and preserve the farmers' resilience, and a very important topic, how to finance the transition. Yeah. So it's a very integral approach on this. And why regenerative agriculture is so important? Because it's the first goal of the BACA report, the integration of regenerative agriculture in livestock feed, in the production, in the circularity practices, using the manure, in the field, etc., etc. So it's a very important pillar. And what's coming next with the BACA report? We are convinced it's a best practice, so we want to replicate it in other European Union countries, starting with France, which is important for Danone for obvious reasons, but mostly in underdeveloped countries, because we strongly believe that this is where we should prioritize our actions. And we are going to start with Morocco and Mexico, because there's a need to have this approach and to accelerate the decarbonization of the dairy sector. We hopefully, the BACA report, it's a word game. BACA is cow, but it's with a B, for low carbon, bajo carbono. Okay. So we want to achieve dairy low carbon products, and we are sure that we can achieve it with this approach. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sounds very exciting to see really the decarbonizing is one of the critical elements. Tara, can you tell us more about how Region 10 support farmers? You were the one putting the farmers at the center, and other stakeholders in this journey towards deep regeneration.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. How I'm going to share this is really talk about some of the key challenges or circumstances that we identified and how we're addressing it through the outcomes framework that I mentioned. So the first was around practices. We talked about we talked about there being many different practices around regenerative. We're steering a little bit away from looking at individual types of practices. There are many frameworks out there. In fact, we'd come up with, I think, over 150 existing frameworks around regenerative. So why another one, right? Well, what we found with the practices that are, the frameworks that are out there, many are focused largely on practices and a subset of what those practices are. Nothing wrong with practices. We need practices to lead towards outcomes. But the framework that that is in development with us is really shifting that perspective towards outcomes. So that's the first. Okay, maybe I'll go through the problems and the responses in the interest of time. I'll go through problems and responses. At Regen 10, and of course the title, the name suggests regenerative, perhaps giving the idea that it's narrow in its focus, but really this is a broad tent. We're agnostic about definitions when it comes to regenerative. We want to make sure, we understand that regenerative food systems has many pathways to arrive there, and so we're including all in that sense. A second challenge that we found among these 150-odd frameworks was many of them are focused largely on environmental practices and outcomes. Again, very important, but not enough. Another wider group of them are environmental and economic. Great, very important, but not enough. So our framework is building in also socio-cultural outcomes. And we believe socio-cultural needs to sit equally at the table with economic and environmental outcomes. And we also, with the framework, need to consider trade-offs. So what are the trade-offs that happen when you adopt certain practices as they relate to other outcomes? So increasing yield and productivity, and what impact does that have on farmer livelihoods? Cost of transition, also very important there. The third problem that we are addressing is that data is often not owned by the people who are actually delivering on that data, the farmers, the landscape actors. That data often sits elsewhere, sometimes even behind a paywall. So it's very difficult for farmers and landscape actors to even be able to track their own progress over time as they implement different regenerative practices. So this framework is intended to address that as well. It also empowers farmers to collect and own that primary data. And with that, armed with that evidence, mobilize, as you said, finance, also drive policy change that supports this whole process, because it's not going to be possible with just funders and donors in individual spaces. There has to be a policy environment to make this sustainable. It also enables farmers to share that data with corporates and other value chain actors and to be an equal part of that conversation around the transition. And owning that data as well. And there are, as I said, many frameworks, and there is the Psi platform, for instance, that is much of industry are working together around. It's called Regenerating Together, and industry has gotten behind that. It's very much environmentally focused. We are working with Psi platform using our framework to help raise the floor on what these types of frameworks could look like, so that they are including socio-cultural elements as well. And we're hearing this from industry too. The environmental is possible, economic is possible, socio-cultural is really hard. And so they're seeking guidance to make that change at the outcomes level. Very quickly, also a lot of the practices are focused at the shallow end, and we see this regenerative journey as a long-term journey from shallow to deep. So what we want is to paint a picture of what's possible in that movement from shallow to deep using this framework. And finally, many of these frameworks are not consultative with farmers, with the key actors at the landscape level. So why are we launching today, 2:30 at the FAO Pavilion, please join us. Why are we launching a draft? We might be the only initiative out of the 200 today that are talking about a draft. It's not a final product, because for us, this outcomes framework is the first of a journey of consultation over the next 1 year with farmers, with landscape actors, with business, to refine and shape this so that we have a core set of indicators, of metrics, socio-cultural, environmental, and economic. Thank you.
Thank you. If I heard you well, and if I can summarize what you said in one word, it needs to be just. No one needs to be left behind.
100%. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria Dolores, you we heard about before from Daniel about the importance of farmers-led innovation. You mentioned about working with the farmers. And I would like to see your perspective on how innovation at the grassroots level contribute to broader adaptation of regenerative agricultural practices.
Well, first of all, for us, promoting holistic transformations in the food system is imperative, as we have been talking about. And we found some challenges that it's important to us to review them. Firstly, there's farmers' reluctance to reduce the chemical inputs due to the long-standing practices and the areas, because they concerns about potential yield losses with mulching regenerative practices that won't happen. Secondly, the inherent rigidity of the practice and traditional methods in the farming. We don't promote the plowed practices. We just put some areas and some mulch up the earth, so we don't open the CO2. Third, and as we said about institution, we have, for example, and in concrete areas of Spain that we met in the project, we feel a bit of rigidity and a lack of innovation with the practices and with the new ideas to change the practice, to change the methods. So that's why we promote that ape with the institutions, and we think that we have to open our minds. We won't be able to change if we are so rude about the new ideas. And overcoming these challenges, we know that they require grassroots innovations where the local initiative showcase tangible successes. We have big examples of that type of practice here in Spain, in Extremadura and in Andalusia. So we can see the results that they are making in desert areas, because this type of practice is a good option in damage-fired areas and in dry, as Murcia, because I'm from there, and there is not a wet region, as always. And moreover, these grassroots initiatives contribute significantly to regenerative areas, not only affected by drought and fair mates. It's another vision. We not only focus in them, we go moreover and we think about cereals plants and cereal farms that we can create another system that, as I said, we don't focus on plot the earth and go out the CO2 instead of add the rest. So I think that it's important to us to identify, as I said before, the context, the area, and search and study individually for it.
Yeah.
That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. Local adaptation, local innovation as a key pillar to that. I've been indicated, Carla, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have time for public questions, so let me wrap up here. I think that was very exciting and diverse entry points to the topic of regenerative agriculture. And indeed, it reinforced the idea that we need all the stakeholders in the ground. That is complex, that is, there are so many factors that needs to be taken into account, socio-cultural, economic, just, gender, youth, and so I would like to, first of all, thank Spain for hosting this and for hosting this event in the pavilion. And of course, thank all the speakers for their amazing contribution to the debate around regenerative agriculture. Thank you.